Ever wondered if the people who ignore you might actually share some surprising traits? When you're constantly being ignored by someone, it can be pretty frustrating, right? You start to wonder if you've done something wrong or if there's something wrong with you. But what if I told you that the problem might not be you at all? What if there are certain traits that people who ignore you tend to have in common? Understanding these traits can be really helpful in navigating your relationships, whether it's romantic, friendly, or professional. It can give you a better idea of how to approach the situation and maybe even how to avoid it in the future. Plus, it can help you identify any patterns or behaviors that might be contributing to the ignoring. So, let's dive in and explore these traits together. Are you ready? People who ignore you often have a hard time with emotional regulation. They might struggle to process and express their emotions in a healthy way, which can lead to them shutting down or ignoring others altogether. This can manifest in behavior like canceling plans at the last minute or not responding to messages for hours. When someone is struggling to regulate their emotions, it can be really tough for them to be present in relationships. They might feel overwhelmed or anxious, causing them to withdraw from interactions altogether. And, unfortunately, this can leave the other person feeling confused, hurt, or frustrated. This emotional dysregulation can also affect how they communicate with others. They might come across as insensitive or uncaring, even if that's not their intention. It's like they're stuck in their own emotional world and can't connect with others on a deeper level. The second trait is that people who ignore you often have a fear of intimacy. They might be afraid of getting too close to others, which can lead to them maintaining a safe emotional distance. This can be really frustrating for the other person, especially if they're trying to build a connection. For people with a fear of intimacy, being ignored can be a way of self-protection. They might feel like they're avoiding the risk of getting hurt or rejected. But in reality, they're actually pushing others away and creating a sense of disconnection. You might observe this fear of intimacy in everyday interactions, like when someone is hesitant to make eye contact or seems uncomfortable with physical touch. They might come across as aloof or standoffish, making it hard to build a meaningful connection. The third trait is that people who ignore you often struggle with empathy. They might have difficulty putting themselves in other people's shoes and understanding their perspectives. This can lead to them being more focused on their own needs and desires, rather than considering the feelings of others. When someone lacks empathy, it can be really challenging for them to maintain healthy relationships. They might prioritize their own interests over the needs of others, leading to conflicts and feelings of resentment. This lack of empathy can also be linked to a lack of self-awareness. They might not realize the impact their behavior is having on others, or they might be unwilling to acknowledge it. Either way, it can create a sense of disconnection and hurt. The fourth trait is that people who ignore you often have a tendency to prioritize their own needs over others. They might be really focused on their own goals and ambitions, which can lead to them neglecting the needs of others. When someone is more focused on themselves, it can be really challenging for them to maintain a sense of connection with others. They might prioritize their own desires over the needs of others, leading to feelings of frustration and resentment. This prioritization of self can also affect how they communicate with others. They might come across as self-centered or entitled, making it hard for others to feel heard or understood. The fifth trait is that people who ignore you often have a tendency to be manipulative. They might use guilt, shame, or anxiety to control the behavior of others. This can be really toxic and create a sense of resentment or frustration. When someone is being manipulative, it can be really hard to build trust in a relationship. They might use passive-aggressive tactics or make subtle jabs to get a reaction from others. This manipulation can be really subtle, but it can have a big impact on the dynamic of the relationship. It's like they're trying to pull the strings from behind the scenes, rather than being open and honest about their needs. The sixth trait is that people who ignore you often have a tendency to be narcissistic. They might have an inflated sense of self-importance or a deep need for admiration. When someone is narcissistic, they can be really challenging to deal with. They might be more focused on their own needs and desires than the needs of others, leading to feelings of frustration and resentment. This narcissism can also affect how they communicate with others. They might come across as arrogant or entitled, making it hard for others to feel heard or understood. The seventh trait is that people who ignore you often have a history of trauma. They might be carrying around emotional baggage that makes it hard for them to connect with others. Research has shown that people who have experienced trauma are more likely to have trouble forming healthy relationships. They might struggle with trust, intimacy, or emotional regulation, making it hard to build a strong connection with others. This trauma can also affect how they communicate with others. They might come across as guarded or defensive, making it hard for others to get close. The eighth and final trait is that people who ignore you often have a tendency to be addictive personalities. They might struggle with addiction or compulsive behaviors, which can lead to them neglecting the needs of others. When someone is struggling with addiction, it can be really challenging for them to maintain a sense of connection with others. They might prioritize their addiction over the needs of others, leading to feelings of frustration and resentment. This addiction can also affect how they communicate with others. They might come across as evasive or dishonest, making it hard for others to trust them. So, there you have it, the 8 surprising traits that people who ignore you might have in common. From emotional dysregulation to addictive personalities, these traits can give you a better understanding of why someone might be ignoring you. Remember, understanding these traits isn't about blaming or judging others, it's about recognizing patterns and behaviors that might be contributing to the ignoring. By recognizing these traits, you can start to develop strategies for dealing with them and maybe even avoid them in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'd love to hear about your experiences with people who ignore you. Have you noticed any of these traits in others or maybe even in yourself? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other video on personal growth.